What is the treasure? The treasure is that the private sector is trying to figure out what it means to create value for society. That way to think about their own existence is something that, guess what? The nonprofit sector has been there forever.
Thank you for talking to me at the end of a long day. I am so thrilled to have this conversation. I'm here with Maurizio Zollo, who I am just so lucky to have recently learned about your work. And I want to, so that I don't butcher anything, would you just give us a little introduction to yourself and your work and what brings you to this conversation?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having thought of me and involved me in this conversation. Basically, my current responsibility is to direct a research center that I've created a couple of years ago, Imperial College Business School. It's called Leonardo Centre on Business for Society. I'm also the head of the management and entrepreneurship department, but that's not what we're going to talk about today. The center, however, I think is meaningful to this conversation because we are developing on a couple of decades of experience in studying and at the same time collaborating with the private sector, with companies who are trying to understand what it means to be actually a citizen, a corporate citizen that integrates the interests and the needs of society in what they're doing. And not only trying to understand, but also trying to innovate and change in a transformational way what they're doing. And so this is quite fundamental because clearly it potentially can involve directly the role of the third sector, right, and non-government NGOs and civil society. Although that potential, unfortunately, as of today, is largely untapped, and so I think that's going to be something that we're going to discuss today.
Yeah. I love that. And I was so excited when we got to first meet and talk about this. But I'm just curious, as kind of a jumping off point, where does your passion for business, for the role of business in creating the societies that we all care about come from? Like, where does your passion for this work really come from?
That's a great question, Mallory. The passion is fundamentally related to the fact that, as an academic, I've always found it always frustrating to basically spend our time observing reality, trying to understand it, of course. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But essentially, that's where the show kind of ends, because the next step in actually trying to make the world a better place is essentially reduced to, doing a good job in class, and clearly trying to influence the young minds, sometimes, business executives, right? Executive education programs. But it's very narrow and obviously with a very small subset of the population of business enterprises and even more of the world that we would like to influence, we would like to see improving. And so that frustration drove me to rethink in quite fundamental ways, and not the only one, by the way, with other very senior colleagues around the world, rethink what we're doing and rethink how we're engaging not only companies, but also their stakeholders, right? Government, local government, civil society, what we called engaged scholarship, right? So basically doing research, but at the same time, experimenting in the field, within organization, in the actual ecosystem where companies and the other actors are working, trying to not only think about what could be done better, but actually trying to see whether that works and what is it that doesn't work and how to fix it and so on and so forth. It's a bit more a lot more concrete. It's kind of looking at the plumbing rather than
Mm.
being just engineers and think about the big house, actually working on the plumbing and making
Mm.
sure that all the details of the house actually work.
Mm. I love that. And I love that image too, because I feel like, the plumbing, like how the water moves around the house is such a good metaphor for even the movement of money throughout society
Yeah,
and the
exactly.
roles that businesses play in that, in terms of their own, them as a company themselves, but also just the facilitation of that movement throughout the ecosystem around them. So I love that metaphor. So tell me from a business perspective. I mean, I think, a lot of the folks who are listening to this come from the nonprofit sector. And so I think for them, it's quite easy to imagine why businesses should be better global citizens. But from a business perspective, why have we seen this growing shift really in so many companies, or why are companies really exploring sort of this reinvention to participate in the ecosystem differently?
Mallory, the answer is very simple, actually,
Mm.
because they're finally realizing that over and above all the ethical issues and the looking good and, all the nice things that have to do with social responsibility, looking responsible in many different ways, the heart of the matter is fundamental and is strategically important for the company. See, every company essentially competes on four different markets. Obviously, there's the product market, there's the labor market, there is the financial markets, and the technology or materials, basically the supply market. It turns out that in each and every one of these markets, essentially their counterparts are demanding companies to change behavior. Employees, we know this, right? Particularly
Hmm.
new generations that, they don't even want to think about, giving their lifetime, their word to a company that they don't respect. Customers are becoming increasingly sensitive to, the company, the reputation, but also the products themselves, the services that they're buying, that they want it to be responsible and socially impactful and environmentally sustainable. Financial markets, this is the most recent components. Financial markets are now have exploded, right? In the last 3 or 4 years, we're now counting about $40 trillion of investments that are done on the basis of ESG filtering assessments. This is 1/3 of the amount of massive amount of equity investments, right? I'm talking about just the equity. Forget about all the other parts, just on capital, right? So
Mm.
when you have 1/3 of investors that are asking you to do this, I mean, you've got to listen. There's no question about it. Now, on the last bit, I know that I'm giving you a long answer
No,
here,
it's
but
great. It's great.
the last bit is that on the supply side, companies are realizing that all of a sudden they're not only responsible for what they're doing, but also for what all the
Mm.
supply chain is doing. So it's not enough that they are respectable, that they, don't infringe on human rights and or environmental destruction. But if their suppliers are doing, and in most cases, very large percentage of their social and environmental impact, negative impact, is in the supply chain, right?
Hmm.
Not internal to them. Obviously, they need to get their house in order as well. But the supply chain is huge, particularly for large multinational companies, right?
Hmm.
And that's a completely different ballgame. How do you have thousands of suppliers, how do you get them to behave? But
Mm.
you see the power, however, because the moment that one, if not obviously many, multinational companies are asking their suppliers to change the way that they do business, what do you think the suppliers are going to say? I'm going to try to do it. Otherwise, I'm not
Yeah.
going to be able to sell you anymore, right?
Yes.
You're my big client. And so the combination of all these pressures are now unbearable. The big problem is still there, though. They're all waking up finally to this
Hmm.
reality. that doesn't mean that they have the answer to the
Mm-hmm.
question, what does this mean? How am I going to change? What is it exactly I need to do? That's what they're struggling with. That's where particularly the nonprofit sector has a big piece of the answer. They're not realizing that they have it. They are not quite conscious that they do. But in my view, there's no question. Because you see, the problem is not even fixing the operations, okay, I need to put some more filters so that I don't pollute as much, or I need to adjust a little bit the way that I treat my employees and so on. Those are the quick fixes. That's easy to do. What is not easy to do is to rethink the whole purpose of my company, right? How do I rethink the way that I compete on the product markets and so on and so forth, on the basis of solving societal problems, or essentially making, all the stakeholders, right, all the investors of capital, financial capital, but also human capital, right, my employees, social capital, the customers, the suppliers, the local communities, they are all investing in my company. They are all investors in different ways in the creation of my company, in the growth of my company, and in the success of my company. They expect returns on their investment, right? They expect to get something back. I'm not organized to give them what they're expecting, right? The basic, maybe obviously I give a wage to my employees, and that's not enough, right? They're expecting a lot more, and that's the big problem. That's the real issue, is how to rethink the purpose of the business organization and how to make the transition. Because by rethinking the purpose, then all of a sudden I need to rethink the governance of my company, the leadership models, the culture, the incentive systems, the control system, and so on and so forth, right? All the big core pieces, right, of the engine of a company that makes a company work. Everything has to be redesigned.
So how does the nonprofit sector plug in there? I know when we were talking previously, you said the word treasure, that you felt like the nonprofit sector was sitting on this treasure and had these keys really to unlocking the possibility here. So can you give me an example or two of like how a nonprofit might plug into one of these problems and help a company solve it?
So first of all, what is the treasure? The treasure is that the private sector is trying to figure out what it means to create value for society. That way to think about their own existence is something that, guess what? The nonprofit sector has been there forever, right? That's exactly what they're living and breathing. The most valuable asset, if you want, of the nonprofit sector is to share their own way to think about the role of their organization, the way that they organize themselves to make sure that they're contributing in a positive way in their own, obviously, in their own specific area, right? Area of expertise. But sharing that mindset, sharing that logic, not just the service or the particular activity, the project. Of course, project is the core of a potential partnership with the private sector, but it's the mindset that is the real treasure. Is by working together unconsciously, the nonprofit sector will diffuse its mindset, its way of thinking, and the private enterprise will understand what it means to really be thinking and organize itself to create, to have a positive impact on society and on the natural environment. That is the potential, as I said before, largely untapped. And this is a problem both for the private sector, because they are not capable of really learning, right? And speeding up and improving this transition that they would like to do. They have to. And at the same time, it's a real pity for the nonprofit sector, because this will allow the real value added form of growth, of development, of learning, also for the nonprofit sector, and of funding of their activity. right?
Mm-hmm.
All of that would come at the same time if, on both sides, of course, there is a willingness, an investment, really. It has to be an investment of time and energy to figure out how to position whatever each has in order to benefit the other.
Mm-hmm.
For the nonprofit, I think it's critical, just as it is for companies. Now, I'll give you some examples, but it's actually relatively straightforward. Look at how the big global NGOs are organized. Amnesty International, WWF, they have entire divisions dedicated to the fruitful, positive engagement of companies on the basis precisely of creating joint projects that will obviously benefit the agenda of the NGO, clearly. But at
Mm-hmm.
the same time, will also transfer the mindset and transfer the logic of how to organize in order to respond to the issues of human rights or environmental issues, right? It's by rubbing each other, right, elbow to
Mm-hmm.
elbow on projects that really all the implicit, the mindset really gets influenced. And it's great for both. Now, what does this mean for small NGOs, right?
Mm-hmm.
The local, focus, maybe working on specific issues, whether it's health or poverty or inclusion or education, whatever that is. I'm a small little NGO trying to do as much as possible for my local communities. Well, first of all, there are local enterprises
Mm-hmm.
in your local communities. To the extent that you think about how to organize, how to present, how to frame the narrative that, such a way that is of interest for companies in the local communities that are interested in understanding what it means to be good
Mm-hmm.
corporate citizenship. But also there are local subsidiaries of larger companies that might
Mm-hmm.
have already their mandates, right? They would belong to larger groups, and therefore they know that they should be enhancing, right, in a positive way,
Mm-hmm.
regenerating, if you want, both the social and environment and the natural environments, right? And so they are actively looking for the NGOs that are willing to collaborate, that are willing to make an effort with the
Mm-hmm.
right kind of mindset and the right type of organization, right? Because that's
Mm-hmm.
the biggest problem, is that there is a mindset shift that is necessary also for the NGO, right? The mindset that is, in a way, more geared towards understanding how to run a business. Okay, even
Mm-hmm.
though for profit is the business mentality, is the way to actually manage projects as if you were, if you want, independently, whether you're doing for profit or non-profit, the economic sustainability of the organization obviously is primary.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what they're looking for. The companies, local companies, particularly if they're subsidiaries of larger companies, they're dramatically in search of the right kind of partners. It's a question of organizing in terms of activity, but also in terms of communication and capacity to engage the private sector. That would make a difference for the individual NGO as well as for the plurality of NGOs in any local environment.
I totally agree that I feel like there's this mindset. Both entities are stuck in their own sort of mindset and siloed thinking. And there's tremendous benefit from them coming together. And there's a certain amount of mindset work that needs to be done to prepare them to come together, to even be open to coming together. I think on the company side, I hear all the time, like, oh, well, I'm nervous to work with nonprofit. Like, how hard are they going to be to work with? Are they constantly just going to be asking us to sponsor this event and this event? And it doesn't feel like the nonprofit is really interested in mutually beneficial partnerships. And I think that that is true on the nonprofit side. And I feel like I was guilty of this early in my nonprofit years too, of being like, hey, I'm a nonprofit. We're doing good work. Just like give us money because you make a lot of it.
Exactly. We got a lot of money. Come on, give someone. And if that's the only thing that we're asking, come on.
Yeah.
It's not fruitful. I would say it's not fruitful for the NGO as well.
No.
Because it becomes the mentality of kind of asking, begging for money rather than creating value for the counterparts that you want in any case to work with you on your agenda, but in a way that is good for them as well, beyond the feel good. Right?
Yeah.
Because they also have their own goals.
Yes. I remember saying one time to a marketing director, VP, I want to make sure we come up with a partnership that's really beneficial to your company because I want the whole ecosystem in this area to succeed. And so tell me, how can my organization support you? He just stopped and he was like, in 15 years of doing this, no one has ever said that to me from the nonprofit sector before. I think it is really problematic. And I think some of this goes back to a lot of nonprofit mindset around we're the do-gooders and we're fixing a lot of the problems that the public sector or that
you
the
guys
private
have
sector
created.
Yes, exactly. And so that creates this barrier to collaboration. And I think the recognition for the nonprofit sector, and something I say to my folks all the time is, look, businesses are changing and business is changing. And business is solving a lot of problems out there that
this is willing to, right? So the question is that they're realizing that they have created the problems and they're trying to become a solution, right? To look for the solutions. And guess who has the answer? Guess who has the expertise, right? in providing the solution? It's the nonprofit sector. So to me, and to you, it's a there's nothing new here. There's nothing amazing. But the problem, as you said, is that the mindsets are hard to change, right? They are deeply ingrained in our identity, in the way we just think about, we've always done this, right? And this is our process. This is how we do things, right? It's our culture. And that's tough. I couldn't think of a better moment than now to invest in making a clear cut, right? Changing in a fundamental way the way that we think about our identity from a nonprofit standpoint, and the way that we engage and propose fruitful partnerships for us and for the private sector.
I want to sort of double tap on one of the things that you said before around the fact of the matter is when nonprofits are staying in this really transactional state with companies, it is not beneficial for them from a financial standpoint. That's how, so often I have folks ask me, one of my big sort of courses is around how nonprofits can build corporate partnerships, annual corporate partnership programs, as opposed to so many nonprofits think about corporate sponsorship on an event basis or a specific campaign basis. And that is not about creating strategic partnerships. That's not about solving a problem together. Go ahead.
Every NGO, if they could think about themselves as the suppliers to a fundamental good, right? Service, where the private sector is on the demand side, right? So there is a supply and demand. What is that good, that service? Is the solution to social maladies, right? Whatever obviously is the social malady that the NGO is expert in. That social malady is recognized now by the private sector as something that they need to do something about. There's no question. The demand is there. In a way, of course, they can create internal projects and do a lot of nice stuff. If you take a sustainability report from any company, you got 50, 60 on average, right? It can go up to 100 initiatives every year of
Mm,
good stuff that they do. Most of them, not all, most of them is done internally. Okay.
mm,
But they also know that it's not, first of all, it's not enough. Second, it's not particularly efficient
mm,
because there are experts out there
mm,
who can actually help them, right? That's
mm.
demand and supply that needs to meet for both benefits, right? For the benefit of both. And shifting the way to think about ourselves as the suppliers of this, of solutions, is, yeah, I mean, it's a cultural shift, but it puts the whole conversation on completely different grounds, right? Uh,
Yes.
because it's a win-win for both immediately.
Exactly. And the other thing that you are saying here, I think that I'm hearing, or at least it's resonating with me this way, is that this also really shifts some power dynamics between the nonprofit and the for-profit sector that have been really detrimental for a long time. And this, this I shared with you when we first spoke, my sort of asset mapping process that allows organizations to see all the components of value inside their organization. And you're highlighting a really critical one here too, which is just around thought leadership and the knowledge that they have around the local community and, this supply that they have. And I think what I want nonprofits to really hear in this is like, you have tremendous value to your corporate partners. And so when you're sitting at this table, when you're trying to build, mutually beneficial partnerships, it allows the breakdown of the old power dynamics around sort of that like hounding for funding and all those things. Cause it's like, it's all about alignment and fit, right? And it's not about any company being the right partner for you. It's about finding the company that's looking to solve the same problem you're working to solve and coming together.
And therefore, the question that you ask that marketing person is exactly the right one, right? It is the NGO's responsibility to ask the counterpart, what is your strategic problem? What are you trying to solve?
Mm-hmm.
Right? First of all, because if it's something different from what I can help you with, then I know that,
Yeah.
there's nothing to do. It's okay. There will be others
Yes.
who will help you. But if it is, then, the match starts. And there it's a completely different conversation. How are we going to make it work? Because you need what I can give, right?
Mm.
And therefore, it becomes really a collaborative process that helps, as I said, not only the specific project-based activity to obviously be designed and start with the right, you know, logic, the right mindset, and all the right resources and so on. That's great. But more subtly, maybe, but equally importantly, is the fact that both the people
Mm.
on the two sides will start working together and will start, if you keep on asking the right questions, right, which is about how you guys actually organizing yourself, but maybe you
Mm-hmm.
could do something different, but you're not considering this and you're not considering that, which
Mm.
is besides, right, over and above the project itself.
Mm.
It's really the conversation about what does it mean to have an organization that, yes, in the case of the business, needs to create returns for their investors, as
Mm-hmm.
well as, however, create well-being for their employees, for their local communities, and so on and so forth, right? I mean, for their
Mm-hmm.
suppliers. So the key is share on both sides, by the way, because also NGOs have a lot to learn
Mm-hmm.
besides the project activity on how the companies are organizing themselves. There are all sorts of
Mm-hmm.
capabilities that they have, project management, cost control. I mean, you name it, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it would be wonderful if NGOs would have those capabilities as well as the capacity to to act on their particular their particular subject area.
Mm.
So
Well,
it's all the
yeah.
rest that is just as important as getting a good project, you see.
Yes. Well, there's so many things you said that I love there. And I think, one of the mindset pieces that I feel like the for-profit sector has that is the nonprofit sector is so baked in scarcity mindset that it often like holds them back from thinking bigger or imagining. And so I think the coming together of solving this problem and the for-profit sector really having more experience with maybe innovation or iteration, and being able to sort of formulate different models and like sustainable models, that wisdom and experience and thinking is tremendously impactful for the nonprofit and things that the nonprofit wouldn't think about alone, right? And then what you're saying is, of course, on the flip side, there are all these, like I have said for a long time, I'm like, anytime a company is making a big strategic decision around something that impacts a particular audience or particular community, why the heck don't they have nonprofit leaders who know those communities, know those people in the room? They should be in the room.
In the room. Thank you. Thank you very much for saying, because that's exactly one of the big things that we are working on in the Leonardo Centre, right? So the whole idea is to engage fundamentally, in this case, companies, right, to start with, in getting them to innovate and experiment on the field, in their own organization, on inclusive ways to create their governance, for instance, right? So it's not just the board of directors that needs to obviously have representatives of their stakeholders, including the NGOs, but also the strategic decision-making processes, right? The committees that make the key strategic decisions, whether it's marketing or purchasing or any of the R&D, new product development.
Yes.
I mean, obviously, you need to have stakeholder representatives there, and the NGOs obviously are the representatives, if you want, of the communities, right? Because they represent a specific need of the community in which they're working. And gosh, I mean, it would be the easiest thing to do for companies to engage NGOs in strategic decision making, but not only, even before, right? To sense what needs to be done. First of all, right? Before you make a strategic decision, you need to really make sure that you understand the problem, to generate potential solutions, right? Certainly the companies could generate solutions internally, but if you talk to people who have been working on those issues forever, probably you would be able to generate more solutions, right? Selecting what is the most appropriate thing to do for the company and for society is exactly the problem, right? That's exactly what companies are trying to learn how to do, right? And that's where you start seeing, right? The NGOs are a huge part of the solution to that problem. And then, by the way, it's not just after the decision is made, imagine, right? So we've done the sensing, we've done the ideation together with the NGOs, we've done the selection, right? And therefore we've made the decision. And now there is a question about, typically these decisions might need to be implemented or tried, piloted, right? Voila. Again, the NGO could help in providing feedback on their pilot projects, on the implementation, so that the company can learn much faster and much better than they would otherwise without their help. You see, that's the treasure that I was talking about before. This is it. This would allow companies to speed up tremendously their innovation and their learning processes, and they would become, hopefully in a not too distant future, really socially, centered on the needs and the interest of their social counterparts, you see?
I mean, I think you and I are sitting here and we're like, this is such a no-brainer. But I'm curious from your perspective, like how much does ego and control hold folks back from innovative partnership?
It could be that it's individual ego. And for sure, there is a question of, letting go of control.
And I don't just mean on the company side. I think this is an
on both
issue on the
sides.
nonprofit side. Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Yeah. And this is my own conviction. I could be wrong, but I think it's more the weight of the past. This is how we've been doing things. It's kind of worked so far. This is who we are. As I was saying, it's mindsets, it's culture, it's the routines that we have built. It's very difficult, as you also said before, to kind of innovate and rethink about what we are, who we are, right? Identity. So, questioning our identity is a big deal, okay, for both NGOs and companies. And then understanding the consequences, right? Because if you come up with a different answer to the question of who we are and what are we supposed to be doing, then all the rest is painful, right? Then I need to change, governance, my all the various things I was talking. And on the NGO side, I need to change my strategy, to rethink how I grow, how I communicate, right? How I source the resources that I need. It's a completely different game in a way. And having the guts, to me, it's a question of courage. Look into this, to ask the tough questions, and to be willing to go to the bottom of the answer. And before, to embrace the need for changing in a radical way the way that we're operating. That's the tough one. It could be ego. It could be, everyone has its own individual idiosyncrasies. But for me, abandoning who we are and what we do in search for a better identity and a better purpose.
Yeah, it's like that cognitive dissonance. Of course, it makes sense that if you're trying to change your external operating or the perception of your company or the way you show up and the way you're providing value, that's going to require an internal look first, an internal change first, but it doesn't make it less scary to do so. So I really hear that. I know we could talk about this forever, and I'm just so grateful for your time. First, let's have you.
Our passions, right?
I know. Well, and I think, look, I so appreciate what you're doing, and I feel like, discovering your work and learning more about it, I feel like I see like the other piece of the puzzle to this piece I've been trying to figure out from the nonprofit side around how to help nonprofits get over that communication barrier to build these mutually beneficial partnerships. My favorite question to ask companies is like, what keeps you up at night? Like, what's the problem you are just banging your head on the wall to solve? And like, can we help you do that? And I think that just, opens up so much. And so then hearing you talk about it from the corporate side is just so amazing. And I could not agree more with you that like now is the time. And so tell everyone, like, where can they learn more about you and find out about your work? And then tell us about your nonprofit so folks can go check that out as well.
Sure. So, well, thank you for this opportunity. Getting in touch with me is actually very simple. Just go on the Imperial College Business School website and look for the Leonardo Centre. You will see not only me, of course, but you will see a whole network of about 15 research centers only at Imperial College, London, that are connected with Leonardo. They're coming from the medical school, the engineering school, the School of Natural Science. Basically, we're all working together in order to tackle issues that really span all the Sustainable Development Goals. Okay? Poverty, all the way to collaboration. And in fact, the 17th is particularly important for us because the way that we are doing this, as I was saying before, is to really engage all the key actors of society, starting from business, of course, because we're in the business school, but their stakeholders are fundamental. And we have created a number of what we call laboratories, right? Collabs, right? It's Leonardo. So inventing, hopefully, and contributing to a renaissance in terms of the way at least the business sector is operating. That's easy. Alternatively, you just send me an email and you will find my email, m.zollo@imperial.ac.uk. But the other part that you were mentioning is a foundation, is a nonprofit foundation. She's called Golden. Golden is based in Holland, is a global community of scholars as well as companies and institutions that have been working for quite a few years now in order to experiment on solutions, on these type of changes that we've been talking about. It's an completely open institution. We welcome everyone, and particularly from the NGO community, whether you want to engage directly with a research center, but there are a lot of other research centers around the world similar to Leonardo who are counting on engagement with both business and the NGOs precisely for that demand and supply discussion we were having. We would be very happy, for instance, to point you to maybe relevant institutions in your area. Golden Foundation is another way of doing it. It's obviously a lot more. It's a nonprofit, right? It is an ideal partner maybe for other NGOs who have the same kind of objectives in mind.
Awesome. And I will make sure that there are links below for all of this information too. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing and for having this conversation with me today.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting. A real pleasure and a lot of fun.